I want to move on to introduce Glenn Wright, who is the president of North America Shell Energy. Did I get it right? Perfect. So some of you might say, what is the president of an oil and gas company doing at a clean tech conference? Well, if you follow the press, you might have read that Shell has bought a European storage company called Sonnen, which is doing a residential battery storage system. They have just acquired a very large, very successful developer called Savion in the US. This is just the tip of the iceberg of their push into the renewable space. I came back from Europe, as I told you before, a couple of days ago, and I learned firsthand about how interconnected all forms of energy are in these days. Oil and gas companies like Shell, Total Energy, and BP are looking at all options to replace the dependence on Russian fuel sources. Renewables are a very important part of any strategic energy portfolio option. And, you know, for me, the most surprising part, talking to executives in Germany, was that, you know, the conservative German government under Angela Merkel had decided to shut down all nuclear plants. And now the Green Party is moving to bring coal back. And the oil and gas companies are pushing into renewables. So if that's not a world upside down, then I don't know what it is. So it's a pleasure, therefore, that I have the chance to introduce Glenn Wright, who was graciously accepting my invitation. He has 30 years experience in industrial and commodity markets. He started his career in 1992 as a research engineer for Royal Dutch Shell, left in 2000 to join Enron, but then returned to Royal Dutch Shell in 2005. I think that was a smart move. And he joined Shell Energy North America in 2008. He spent 14 years now with Shell Energy, holding various VP positions. His current position is President North America and Vice President Renewables and Energy Solutions Americas. Glenn holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and a PhD in Chemical Engineering from the University of Austin, Texas. And he earned an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin. So he's quite accomplished from an academic viewpoint, but also from a professional viewpoint. And I think he is going to give us a terrific presentation this morning. Glenn, can you please come up?
Markus, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. It's a pleasure to be participating at the 2022 UNC Clean Tech Summit. Let me start by asking you a question, a very basic question. If your house was on fire and you had the opportunity to grab just one thing before you ran out the door, what would that one thing be? Now, many people say that they grab cash. Not surprisingly. Some say they would grab legal documents, but for many, many, many years, the overwhelming response to that question was they'd grab a photograph, a photo album. Because photo albums, they link us to our past, they connect us with those who came before us, they allow us to reconstruct our memories of times with family and with friends. And the #1 dominant company in the industry for many years was Kodak. Kodak certainly produced cameras, as did many others. But the reason they were so dominant is that everyone depended on Kodak to produce, to develop, and to print those photos. They were absolutely dominant. And they were also a very, very, very innovative company. In fact, in the 1970s, they were the first to produce digital photography. In fact, they produced the first digital camera, and it was small enough to practically fit in your front pocket, or maybe more realistically, in a big backpack. okay? But they were the first to do it. Now imagine that you're a technician who invented the digital camera, and you had the opportunity to go to corporate headquarters and to share your innovation with Kodak executives. And your speech goes something like this: I have this phenomenal innovation, this fantastic invention, and it will make everything that we do here at Kodak utterly and completely obsolete. I imagine that's a pretty tough sell, yeah? I mean, can you imagine that's a pretty tough sell? I mean, after all, at the time, recognize that there were no digital photos, there were no profits associated with them, there was no infrastructure for them, there was no business model. And consumers, well, they really couldn't miss that which they had never had. So for all intents and purposes, there was no immediate market for photographs either. So you can imagine their response. It probably looked a little something like this. Yeah? I'm not going there with you. Why would I? I have millions of customers today with whom I have a fantastic bond. They love our products. They love our services. Surely, they would not defect for some emerging technology. And you know how this story ends, of course, right? In the 1990s, digital cameras came to the market and Kodak's business was utterly decimated. Yeah, completely. Now, to be clear, Kodak executives rightly considered the digital photography a threat. Rightly they did. Their mistake was they failed to embrace the technology. Yeah? And as a consequence, Kodak is not today what they once were. It's the case that, progress marches forward. Superior products, they win. Now, you know why I'm telling you this story, right? You know why I'm telling you this story because, after all, I am the Vice President for Renewables and Energy Solutions at Shell. Yeah? Renewables, Energy Solutions, Vice President at Shell. Today, oil and gas profit margins are much greater for us than renewables, far and away. But the hydrocarbons that have sustained us for so many years are increasingly seen as a threat to our future. The company faces a crossroad, very similar to the choice that Kodak executives had to make decades ago. Do we focus all of our effort and energy on those hydrocarbons that produce great profits today, or do we shift to an energy source that is likely to dominate the future? That's the choice that ultimately we have to make. You see, this is not just about Shell, any more than those photographs were about Kodak. People clutched and clung to their photo albums because those memories were represented by those photo albums. And people go to Shell because they need the energy to power their lives. The energy of the future is cleaner, and Shell wants to provide it. It's the reason Shell has established this new business line we call Shell Energy, that's dedicated to leading Shell into a cleaner energy future. And I have the privilege of leading that business in the Americas, and I'm excited by it. We recognize that as we embark on this journey, we have to do so with a sense of humility. We have to gain the confidence, the trust of those who have concern about climate change. And we have to maintain the trust of customers that we've served so effectively for so many years. Net zero. These two words largely describe our strategy for the future. It comes down to these two words, net zero. Now, what does that fundamentally mean? Well, net zero is the point in time where we, as a society, stop adding to the stock of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in the climate. It's the point where we turn the tide on climate change. Now, that's easy enough to say, but how do we actually deliver it? That's a challenging task. Because what it fundamentally means is that we need to reduce emissions and we need to continue to supply energy to a growing population. It's the dual challenge, and it might well be the defining challenge of our time. 2 years ago, Shell stated its ambition to be a net zero emissions business by 2050 or sooner in step with society. Now that goes beyond our own operations. We aim to be a pioneer in helping our customers decarbonize as well. We're excited by the challenge. We look forward to the opportunities that will flow from it. We're optimistic because we believe and have faith in human ingenuity. We also believe that people will make choices, personal choices about their energy consumption in a common goal to preserve climate. We'll talk a bit more about Shell's strategy in a moment, but for now I want to delve a little deeper into grounding on net zero. What does it mean? What are the complexities? Why the urgency? Now, Shell is sponsoring a series of independent films, short films, called Rational Middle on Energy Net Zero. We debuted the first 2 of those films this month at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and it was well received. Again, it goes into why, the complexities, the challenges that we face. And what I'd like to do right now is share the first of those films. It's a brief one. I'd like to share the first of those films because I hope it encourages the kind of a conversation that we all need to have together as we pursue this common objective. Please take a look.
There's really no doubt that the climate's changing. We have levels of carbon dioxide that are as high as they've been in 2 million years. We've got other major greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide, and those are at their highest levels in at least 800,000 years. It's led to temperature increase globally on the land, over oceans, and over ice.
We have changes in the rate of decline of ice sheets. We have changes in the distribution of plants and animals, increases in wildfire, tide gauge records from around the world showing an acceleration of sea level rise.
We are just now at a point where climate change is clearly impacting virtually every segment of our population. When you start to have that happen, it becomes clear that it's a call to action.
One of the benchmarks that's come into prominence over the last several years is a focus on different degrees of allowable temperature change that we should tolerate globally. And there's been conversation around 1.5 degrees Celsius change relative to what it was before we had major industrialization, kind of what's called the pre-industrial era.
The IPCC initiated a special report, and the current trajectory with greenhouse gas emissions would increase temperature to 1.5 degrees or higher above pre-industrial by 2050, roughly, unless greenhouse gas emissions are curtailed quickly.
We're looking at having already achieved around an average of 1 degree C from pre-industrial times to now.
Under 1.5 degrees, we're already seeing some of the impacts of climate change. We're seeing stronger storms, we're seeing ecosystem impacts. We're already seeing wars and civil unrest over water and natural resources. Well, in a future with mass ecosystem devastation, those problems will be worse.
We can't afford to get it wrong. And if we get it wrong, our future generations are going to be worse off than the past generations. What is going well is that there is an awareness that is starting to build.
What virtually all countries agreed to at the Paris Agreement was to take actions to limit temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius and to make best efforts to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase. So that then led to a focus on, well, what does it mean to reach 1.5 degrees? You know, how fast would the global energy system and how fast would our emissions have to change to try and limit temperature to that level?
If your goal is to prevent the additional accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere, one way to get there is to zero out your emissions, to stop all processes that would emit CO2. And those processes are things like burning fuels like we use for our cars or our power plants, or reacting cement to make concrete in kilns that will produce CO2. A lot of things we do that produce CO2 into the atmosphere. Decarbonization has 3 steps in my view. The first step is efficiency and conservation, which is light bulbs, mass transit, building codes, that kind of thing. Step 2 is electrification. So when you electrify things, you get inherent efficiencies, but also the power sector is decarbonizing because wind and solar are so cheap, and gas historically, at least the last decade or so, has been cheaper than coal. If we look at the American economy, about 40% of our primary energy use is for the power sector. We're going to have to at least double that. But whether we're electrifying 70 or 80 or 90% of the economy, there are parts of the economy that are difficult to electrify: aviation, marine shipping, certain types of industrial heat, but we still need to decarbonize. And that's the third step, to use fuels that don't have those emissions or come up with alternatives. That's really hard. So another alternative is to go to something called net zero, where we still have some emissions. And then we'll remove the equivalent CO2 from the atmosphere with, say, direct air capture or planting trees or doing soil carbon sequestration or something like that.
So the benefit of net zero is that we can keep these processes that maybe are highly optimized, that we don't yet have a great substitute for, or would just require massive investment in infrastructure changes, and then remove the emissions afterwards. And it's not perfect, certainly, and we shouldn't necessarily think of these carbon removal technologies as purely a way to keep doing what we're doing, but they are complementary to a decarbonization mindset.
One of the things that is really powerful about the concept of net zero is that it's a decision rule and it's a target and a goal that can be applied at multiple levels of decision making. It makes sense for the global planet because to stabilize temperature, we need to get global net emissions down to zero. It works at a country level as a target. The notion of that a country's own emissions, when added up, should get to net zero. It works at a company level. And we've seen many companies commit to having net zero in their emissions. It works at kind of a technological level. So it's actually a remarkably resilient and applicable concept at multiple levels of decision making. And it's pretty unique in that regard. It's incredibly important for the United States to lead on climate change and to not only decarbonize our own economy, but to really serve as a role model and as a demonstration to the rest of the world that this can be done. We are the wealthiest country on Earth. We have the highest degree of technical capability on Earth.
We became a large geopolitical power through pollution, through our energy systems, our industry systems. And I think we can maintain that status by becoming a leader in cleaning it up. And I think that we can grow our economy that way. I think that we can become a leader in net zero technologies and in decarbonizing technologies.
The truth of the matter is we have the technologies that are likely available to get us on the pathway through the next 10 years or so to the end of this decade. But beyond this decade and into 2050, we will have to bring into the marketplace technologies that are in existence now. They're on the bench in the lab. They're a part of an entrepreneur's business plan, technologies that need to be commercialized out of universities.
The workforce is demanding that we go to a low carbon future. The consumers are starting to demand that we go to a low carbon future. Major industrial customers are now requiring that their source of electricity or energy is low carbon. Customers like Microsoft and Amazon, big energy consumers, people who care about the bottom line. And the third factor is the investors are starting to demand it. So if the investors, the employees, and the customers are all demanding that we change, we're going to change. Policies can slow it down or speed it up, but they can't stop it at this point. The markets have spoken and the markets have said, we're going to make this change.
We can solve this and continue to have affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. But we've got to take a systems approach, stop the lab exercises of saying, we're going to try this boutique solution here, we're going to do this there. We're going to have to start doing things at scale and try out every one of these approaches, whether it is bringing solar and wind at scale, whether it is looking at geothermal, whether it's looking at electrifying transportation, hydrogen as an industrial fuel, whether it's CO2 capture, whether it's direct air capture, all of these are going to have to be deployed. And if we deploy it at scale, and we start to find the appropriate winners that provide us affordable solutions that are reliable and are sustainable, we can solve the problem at hand.
I think we'll know if we're on the right path to achieving net zero goals if we start to see the emissions declining. That's really the key metric. There might be some lags between, we start seeing emissions declining, we're still seeing extreme weather patterns and things like this. But if we see those emissions declining, we know that that will result in our goal.
We have to act now by bringing the right policies to the fore, technology, and partnerships. If we do that, we will be able to hit net zero by 2050.
We wish to support society's goal to achieve net zero by 2050. We believe that this target will drive increased demand for lower carbon energy products and services, increased demand from governments who wish to reduce emissions, increased demands from businesses who have their own net zero goals, increased demands from consumers who wish to lower their personal carbon footprint. And perhaps in the future, we'll find that cleaner energy solutions are cheaper energy solutions. Shell's own net zero targets means that we will mirror society's pace to deliver net zero by 2050 or sooner. In fact, for us, oil production peaked in 2019, and we expect it will go down year over year, at least through 2030. It also means we're reducing the carbon intensity of our portfolio. More renewables, more hydrogen, less hydrocarbons for the future. We expect fully that by 2030, we will see a 20% reduction in the carbon intensity of our portfolio as compared to today. So by 2030, we believe that we will offer green energy to 50 million homes or more, that we will have 2.5 million charging stations, that in fact, we will see 8 times more low carbon fuels than we produce today in our portfolio. And that hydrogen and biofuels will become 10% of our portfolios compared to 3% today. So what's the plan? Clearly the objective is net zero by 2050, but that's 28 years away. So we have to set short-term and medium-term goals as well. Now, we recognize that when we do that, that subjects us to some scrutiny. But we also recognize that it creates greater accountability, and accountability is important. If we miss those targets, we know we will see scrutiny, we will see criticism, we will perhaps even see scorn from some pretty powerful groups out there, including government, media, our partners, and consumers. So it's important that we get this right. Now, our critics like to say, well, net zero, isn't that just really kicking the can down the road for some time? I mean, after all, you don't really include those so-called scope 3 emissions, do you? Scope 3, by the way, are those emissions that consumers produce when they use our product. So for instance, if I pull in the gas station, the emissions that come from the exhaust that exit my tailpipe, those are scope 3 emissions. And the answer is yes, we do include scope 3. It would be disingenuous not to include scope 3 because those are far and away our biggest emissions, far and away. So our aim is to be a pioneer, as I said earlier, with our customers to help them decarbonize, to bring them along the journey with us. This is Shell's value proposition to a world increasingly threatened by climate change. Number one, that we can be a partner to reduce emissions. Number two, that we can leverage our expertise and our energy innovation to help commercialize and scale clean energy technologies. And number three, that we can leverage and call on our relationships for needed change to the global energy system so that we can create access to energy for all, allowing everyone to participate in a net zero world. Decarbonization. The International Energy Administration, the IEA, estimates that between now and 2030, we need to spend about $5 trillion annually. That's trillion dollars annually if we are to achieve net zero by 2050. And that means more wind, more solar, more infrastructure, more hydrogen, more. We have to do this in a way that's equitable, accessible, reliable, and inclusive. We can't leave anyone behind. So what does that imply? Well, it means a lot of spending. And where's the spending going to come from? Government certainly is going to be part of it, perhaps some from philanthropy, but business is principally where much of it will come. Shell plans to spend $2 to $3 billion annually over the next several years. So where will this money go? Well, we're accustomed to building big. We do complex projects. We spend and invest significantly. And often for this investment, we don't see positive cumulative cash flow for 10 years or more. So we're accustomed to having some patient money. We're well positioned, well equipped for this journey with our customers. How do you reduce emissions in heavy industry? And by heavy industry, I mean the manufacture of steel, cement, chemicals. Typically, these processes require extreme temperatures, and these extreme temperatures are fueled by rich, energy-dense molecules, hydrocarbons. Now, the heavy industry sector is accountable for essentially 25% of global greenhouse gases. Transportation is accountable for another 25% of global greenhouse gases. This too is a very difficult sector to abate because aviation and heavy duty trucking, they require powerful engines. And those engines too need energy-rich, dense energy sources. So it seems that our objective is to find a solution that provides this energy-dense, rich resource and has no greenhouse gases associated with it. That seems like a job for hydrogen. Now, hydrogen has lots of energy for similar amounts of other fuels. And we know this is so because the government, NASA, uses liquefied hydrogen in tanks to launch shuttles into space. It's a powerful, powerful resource. Now, we like to differentiate sources of hydrogen, and we use color designations to do so. Gray hydrogen is typically produced through conventional methods like steam methane reforming, SMR, and that creates emissions. Blue hydrogen uses much the same technology using hydrocarbons, but we capture the emissions and we sequester them. Green hydrogen, that's the ideal, right? That's the ideal. It's typically produced using electrolysis, which effectively is the application of electricity to water to break it into its elemental components, hydrogen and oxygen. So why haven't we been doing this all along, right? Well, the reality is that these machines are really quite expensive. And candidly, there's been insufficient amounts of renewables to do this. But we're on that journey. In July of last year, Shell commenced operations of Europe's largest electrolyzer in Rhineland. This electrolyzer is 10 megawatts and produces about 1,300 tons of hydrogen annually. These hydrogen molecules are being used to reduce the carbon intensity of conventional fuels. And over time, we intend to expand this to 100 megawatts and use those fuels for bio-LNG as well as sustainable aviation fuels. But this isn't even our biggest adventure. or venture in Europe. Our aim in Rotterdam is to create a hydrogen hub. There we intend to install a 200 megawatt electrolyzer. That's enough to produce 50 to 60,000 kilos of hydrogen a day. Initially, that hydrogen will go to Europe's largest refinery, Pernis. But again, in time, the objective is that that will go perhaps to hydrogen fuel cell trucking vehicles. And speaking of trucking vehicles, in California, we've partnered with Toyota and with Kenworth Trucking to establish 3 high-capacity, large hydrogen fueling stations. These stations are intended to create a network along a pathway from the Port of LA to a major warehouse district. Again, along a very polluted pathway, and this will help reduce emissions there. Also, Shell recently made an investment in a company called LanzaJet. And this is a Chicago-based firm. And what this firm does is it basically uses nature-based alcohol, and it uses alcohol and uses a catalytic process to turn it into sustainable aviation fuel. The approach is being funded in part by the Department of Energy, and it also has a grant from Microsoft. And we expect that by next year, it will be in production. The point that I'm trying to make here is this is not just about reducing emissions from planes. It's not just about reducing emissions from trucking. It's to demonstrate that it works and to establish a blueprint that others can follow. Others will in time do these things bigger. Perhaps they will do them better, more efficiently, even less costly, because this is how progress gains momentum. Sector by sector, country by country, this is how the world achieves net zero. So, among all the ways our global energy system must transform, perhaps the most significant transformation will be in the power sector. We must electrify more energy consumption. Do you happen to know what the single largest contributor is to your personal carbon footprint? Any idea? Just yell it out. Air travel? I heard something over here. Okay, let me offer this. It's something a little closer to home. In fact, it's in the home. Oops. It's in the home, right? It's the energy you use to cook, to deliver hot water, to heat your homes. This is the predominant source of energy. 35% of your personal carbon footprint, the average American's personal carbon footprint, is associated with energy used in the home. Do you know what the second contributor to the carbon footprint is for us? I heard it a moment ago. Someone said it. Yell it out. Anything. Driving. Absolutely. I think that's what I heard. Driving. 30% of the carbon footprint of the average American is associated with the fuel they use to drive. Now, the IEA's roadmap suggests that today we have about 5% of vehicles on the road are electric vehicles. And then by 2030, it needs to be 60%. That's their projection. We need more generation. We need more transmission. In the second film, which I will not show today, they show a map of where the most intense energy resource is that we have in the United States. The wind resource, the solar resource. And what you will find is that where that intense resource is not where demand is, where the major cities in the United States are. So we need generation at those resource areas, and we need transmission to take it to where the load actually is. But are we moving fast enough? Consider Badla, India. This is the world's largest solar farm, 14,000 acres. Now for context, imagine that every square inch of this university campus is filled with solar panels, and multiply that by 20. This is a massive wind farm. The IEA suggests that we need one Badla every day from now through 2030 if we're to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Now, this is just one scenario. There are other ways to get there, but it just speaks to the enormous size of the challenge. We have much to do. And Shell's trying to do our part. In 2018, we made an investment in a company called Silicon Ranch Corporation. It is an independent power producer that focuses on solar, and they had 880 megawatts of power capacity in their portfolio when we made our investment. 4 years later, they have more than quadrupled in size and have more than 4 gigawatts of power presently in their portfolio. It is a growing space for us. But it isn't enough for simply to apply our balance sheet. We also need to apply our expertise. Now, in the Northeast, states are looking to offshore wind to reduce emissions. This brings enormous technical challenge, logistical challenge, and procedural challenges. How do you build these wind turbines, and they're enormous in size, in deep water? How do you take the electricity that they produce to shore and then onto the businesses and homes that consume it? How do you manage and navigate and negotiate the labyrinth of regulation to get these things permitted and actually built? How do you address the concerns of coastal landowners or from local fisheries or from the recreational boating industry? Well, Shell has been addressing these how questions for more than 40 years, thanks to our experience in deep water, and it is directly applicable here. In 2019, Shell partnered with another to bid on a block off the coast of Massachusetts. We were successful, and when that development is completed, it will deliver power to 500,000 homes. Later, we partnered with still another entity, firm, to bid on a block, an even bigger block off the coast of New Jersey. We were successful there as well. And very recently, off the coast of New York, we were successful there as well. When you combine New York and New Jersey together, when those are complete, they will deliver enough power for 3 million homes. And we're producing an electrolyzer associated with it as well for hydrogen. So some would say, Shell, why don't you just stay in your lane? Why don't you do what you've done for the last 100 years and just produce more oil and gas? And the answer to that question is really quite simple. We don't want to go the way of Kodak. Shell seeks profits. Profits of the future are in clean energy. This is a wonderful nexus where we have the opportunity to do that which is good for society and for the climate, and to do well for our investors. This is the do good, do well sweet spot, and it is exactly where we want to be. Now, I've talked about technical expertise to execute complex projects, and I've talked about how Shell is backing clean energy technologies, but what I haven't yet talked about is something that is a little more easy to overlook, and it has to do with relationship. We have relationship with energy industry and beyond. When Amazon looks to decarbonize, we can pick up the phone and we can engage with Amazon, and that's exactly what we did. We worked with another partner at World Energy to partner to produce 6 million gallons per year of sustainable aviation fuel for Amazon to help them achieve their net zero objectives by 2040. We have relationships with powerful trade associations to support federal regulation on climate policy, especially on methane. Methane, by the way, is 20 to 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide when in the atmosphere. We have been building industry consensus for carbon pricing, vehicle efficiency standards, tax credits for electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. And we have a relationship with our customers. Shell executes millions of transactions every day, and each one of those transactions is an opportunity to inform our customers about cleaner energy solutions, like Shell Recharge for EV, or providing 100% renewable energy to your home, or battery storage and solar panels that we can provide through our portfolio company, Zonin. It also means partnering and allowing the opportunity for customers to purchase energy credits to offset their fuel usage in their cars. Now listen, I recognize that people often see Shell as a bunch of gas stations. I know this. Our focus groups tell us so. My cousins tell me so when I go to the family reunion. I mean, in fact, years past, when my girls were younger, they would tell their friends that their father works for Shell, and all their friends assumed that their father worked at the local gas station. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. Honest work is honorable work, but that's not where I work. So this is an important thing for us. It may seem odd to many of you to turn to Shell, of all companies, to make climate-friendly choices. It seems counterintuitive. It may even seem antithetical. Yet this is the most critical part of our strategy. Because as I said earlier, the bulk of our emissions are associated with the products that we sell to our customers. We have to bring them along on this journey. We have to help them switch from oil-based to cleaner energy resources, which means they must have confidence in us. They've relied on us in the past. We want them to rely on us in the future. And ultimately, isn't that what relationship fundamentally is really about? So in conclusion, even during a period of great and rapid change, there are constants. I began today by talking about Kodak, a company that is synonymous with photographs. Kodak is no longer globally dominant in their space, but people still cherish photographs. Today, they take them with their phones and they store them in the cloud, but they cherish them just the same. Hydrocarbons will not be the same globally dominant energy source in 2050 as they are today, but people will still need energy. In 2050, it will come more from wind, more from solar, more from hydro, more from geothermal, more from biofuels, and more from hydrogen. Some things change, but others remain very much the same. Climate change was caused, at least in part, by human activity, and humans must solve the climate challenge. Each of us has a role to play, individually, collectively, and institutionally. Contributions must be made by government, by academia, by philanthropy, and by business, especially businesses like Shell. Achieving net zero is a daunting task. Net zero will be expensive, but society has the wealth. Globally, we have the wealth. Net zero will be technically challenging, but we have brilliant, capable minds. And above all, net zero will take effort, the collective effort of each of us. But I believe we as a human race have the will to ensure that the earth is fit for life. Thank you so much.